So kindly, Spo, do not talk rot. There was no possibility of mistake as to whose voice it was. From his earliest years there has always been something distinctive and individual about Gussie's timbre, reminding the hearer partly of an escape of gas from a gas pipe and partly of a sheep calling to its young in the lambing season. Nor was there any possibility of mistake about what he had said. The words were precisely as I have stated. And to say that I was surprised would be to put it too weakly. I saw now that it was perfectly possible that there might be something after all in that wild story of Madeline Bassett's. I mean to say, an Augustus Fink-Nottle who told Roderick Spode not to talk rot was an Augustus Fink-Nottle who might quite well have told him to go and boil his head. I entered the room marvelling. Except for some sort of dim female about the teapot who looked as if she might be a cousin by marriage or something of that order, only Sir Watkin Bassett, Roderick Spode and Gussie were present. Gussie was straddling the hearthrug with his legs apart, warming himself at the blaze, which should, one would have said, have been reserved for the trouser seat of the master of the house. And I saw immediately what Madeline Bassett had meant when she said that he had lost his diffidence. Even across the room one could see that, when it came to self-confidence, Mussolini could have taken a correspondence course. He sighted me as I entered, and waved what seemed to me a dashed patronising hand. Quite the ruddy squire graciously receiving a deputation of the tenantry. "Ah, Bertie, so here you are." "Yes." Come in and have a crumpet." "Thanks." "Did you bring that book I asked you for?" "Awfully sorry, I forgot." "Well, of all the muddle-headed asses that ever stepped, you certainly are the worst. Others abide our question, thou art free." And dismissing me with a weary gesture, he called for another potted meat sandwich. I have never been able to look back on my first meal at Totley Towers as among my happiest memories. The cup of tea on arrival at a country house is a thing which, as a rule, I particularly enjoy. I like the crackling logs, the shaded lights, the scent of buttered toast, the general atmosphere of leisured coziness. There is something that seems to speak to the deeps in me in the beaming smile of my hostess, and the furtive whisper of my host as he plucks at my elbow and says, "Let's get out of here and go and have a whisky and soda in the gun-room." It is on such occasions as this, it has often been said, that you catch Bertram Wooster at his best. But now all sense of bien-être was destroyed by Gus's peculiar manner. That odd suggestion he conveyed of having bought the place. It was a relief when the gang had finally drifted away, leaving us alone. There were mysteries here which I wanted to probe. I thought it best, however, to begin by taking a second opinion on the position of affairs between himself and Madeline. She had told me that everything was now hunky-dory once more, but it was one of those points on which you cannot have too much assurance. "I saw Madeline just now," I said. "She tells me that you are sweethearts still. Correct?" "Quite correct. There was a little temporary coolness about my taking a fly out of Stephanie Bing's eye, and I got a bit panicked and wired you to come down. I thought you might possibly plead. However, no need for that now. I took a strong line, and everything's all right. Still, stay a day or two, of course, as you're here." "Thanks." "No doubt you'll be pleased to see your aunt. She arrives tonight, I understand." I could make nothing of this. My Aunt Agatha, I knew, was in a nursing home with jaundice. I had taken her flowers only a couple of days before. And naturally it couldn't be Aunt Dahlia, for she had mentioned nothing to me about any plans for infesting Totley Towers. "Some mistake," I said. "No mistake at all. Madeline showed me the telegram that came from her this morning, asking if she could be put up for a couple of days. It was dispatched from London, I noticed, so I suppose she has left Brinkley." I stared. "You aren't talking about my Aunt Dahlia?" "Of course I'm talking about your Aunt Dahlia." "You mean Aunt Dahlia is coming here tonight?" "Exactly." This was nasty news, and I found myself chewing the lower lip a bit in undisguised concern. This sudden decision to follow me to Totley Towers could mean only one thing: that Aunt Dahlia, thinking things over, had become mistrustful of my will to win, and had felt it best to come and stand over me and see that I did not shirk the appointed task, and I was fully resolved to shirk it. And so I could envisage some dirty weather ahead. Her attitude towards a recalcitrant nephew would, I feared, closely resemble that which in the old tally-ho days she had been wont to adopt towards a hound that refused to go to cover. "And tell me," continued Gussie, "what sort of voice is she in these days? I ask because if she's going to make any of those hunting noises of hers at me during her visit, I shall be compelled to tick her off pretty sharply. I've had enough of that sort of thing when I was staying at Brinkley." I would have liked to go on musing on the unpleasant situation which had arisen, but it seemed to me that I had been given a cue to begin my probe. "What's happened to you, Gussie?" I asked. "Eh? Since when have you been like this? I don't understand you." "Well, to take an instance, saying you're going to take Aunt Dahlia off. At Brinkley you cowered before her like a wet sock. And to take another instance, telling Spode not to talk rot. By the way, what was he talking about?" "I forget, he talks so much rot." "I wouldn't have had the nerve to tell Spode not to talk rot," I said frankly. My candour met with an immediate response. "Well, to tell you the truth, Bertie," said Gussie, coming clean, "neither would I a week ago." "What happened a week ago?" "I had a spiritual rebirth. Thanks to Jeeves. There's a chap, Bertie." "Ah." "We are as little children frightened of the dark, and Jeeves is the wise nurse who takes us by the hand and switches the light on?" "Precisely. Would you care to hear about it?" I assured him that I was all agog. I settled myself in my chair and, putting match to gasper, awaited the inside story. Gussie stood silent for a moment. I could see that he was marshalling his facts. He took off his spectacles and polished them. "A week ago, Bertie," he began, "my affairs had reached a crisis. I was faced by an ordeal, the mere prospect of which blackened the horizon. I discovered that I would have to make a speech at the wedding breakfast." "Well, naturally." "I know, but for some reason I had not foreseen it, and the news came as a stunning blow. Shall I tell you why I was so overcome by stark horror at the idea of making a speech at the wedding breakfast? It's because Roderick Spode and Sir Watkin Bassett would be in the audience. Do you know Sir Watkin intimately?" "Not very. He once fined me £5 at his police court." "Well, you can take it from me that he's a hard nut, and he strongly objects to having me as a son-in-law. For one thing, he would have liked Madeline to marry Spode, who, I may mention, has loved her since she was so high." "Oh, yes?" I said, courteously concealing my astonishment that anyone except a certified boob like himself could deliberately love this girl. "Yes, but apart from the fact that she wanted to marry me, he didn't want to marry her. He looks upon himself as a man of destiny, you see, and feels that marriage would interfere with his mission. He takes a line through Napoleon." I felt that before proceeding further I must get the lowdown on this Spode. I didn't follow all this man of destiny stuff. "How do you mean, his mission? Is he someone special?" "Don't you ever read the papers? Roderick Spode is the founder and the head of the Saviours of Britain, the fascist organisation better known as the Black Shorts. His general idea, if he doesn't get knocked on the head with a bottle in one of the frequent brawls in which he and his followers indulge, is to make himself a dictator." "Well, I'm blowed." I was astounded by my keenness of perception. The moment I set eyes on Spode, if you remember, I said to myself, what ho, a dictator. And a dictator he had proved to be. I couldn't have made a better shot if I'd been one of those detectives who see a chap walking along the street and deduce that he is a retired manufacturer of poppet valves named Robinson with rheumatism in one arm, living in Clapham. Well, I'm dashed. I thought it was something of that sort. That chin, those eyes, and for that matter, that moustache. By the way, when you say shorts, you mean shirts, of course. No, by the time Spode formed his association, there were no shirts left. He and his adherents wear black shorts. Footer bags, you mean? Yes. How perfectly foul. Yes.
Bare knees.
Bare knees.
Golly.
Yes.
A thought struck me, and I nearly dropped my gasper. Does old Bassett wear black shorts?
Oh no, he isn't a member of the Saviours of Britain. Then how does he come to be mixed up with Spode? I met them going around London like a couple of sailors on shore leave. Sir Watkin is engaged to be married to his aunt, a Mrs. Wintergreen, widow of the late Colonel H. Wintergreen of Pont Street. I mused for a moment, reviewing in my mind the scene in the antique bin. When you are standing in the dock with a magistrate looking at you over his pince-nez and talking about you as the prisoner Wooster, you have ample opportunity for drinking him in. And what has struck me principally about Sir Watkin Bassett that day at Boter Street had been his peevishness. In that shop, on the other hand, he had given the impression of a man who has found the bluebird. He had hopped about like a carefree cat on hot bricks, exhibiting the merchandise to Spode with little chirps of, I think your aunt would like this, and how about this, and so forth. And now a clue to that fizziness had been provided. Do you know, Gussie, I said, I've an idea he must have clicked yesterday. Oh, quite possibly. However, never mind about that. That's not the point. No, I know, but it is interesting. No, it isn't. Perhaps you're right. Don't let us go wandering off into side issues, said Gussie, calling the meeting to order. Where was I?
I don't know.
I do. I was telling you that Sir Watkin disliked the idea of having me for a son-in-law. Spode also was opposed to the match, nor did he make any attempt to conceal the fact. He used to come popping out at me from round corners and muttering threats.
You couldn't have liked that.
I didn't. Why did he mutter threats? Because, though he would not marry Madeline, even if she would have him, he looks on himself as a sort of knight watching over her. He keeps telling me that the happiness of that little girl is very dear to him, and that if I let her down he will break my neck. That's the gist of the threats he mutters, and that was one of the reasons why I was a bit agitated when Madeline became distant in her manner on catching me with Stephanie Byng.
Tell me, Gussie, what were you and Stiffy actually doing?
I was taking fly out of her eye.
I nodded. If that was his story, no doubt he was wise to stick to it.
So much for Spode. We now come to Watkin Bassett. At our very first meeting I could see that I was not his dream man.
Me too.
I became engaged to Madeline, as you know, at Brinkley Court. The news of the betrothal was therefore conveyed to him by letter, and I imagine that the dear girl must have hauled up her slacks about me in a way that led him to suppose that I was some sort of cross between Robert Taylor and Einstein. At any rate, when I was introduced to him as the man who was to marry his daughter, he stared for a moment and said, "What?" incredulously, you know, as if he was hoping that it was all some sort of jolly practical joke and that the real chap would shortly jump out from behind a chair and say boo. When he at last got onto it, that there was no deception, he went off into a corner and sat there for some time, holding his head in his hands. After that I used to catch him looking at me over the top of his pince-nez. It unsettled me.
It wasn't surprising to me. I have already alluded to the effect that over the top of the pince-nez look old Bassett's has had on me. And I could see that if directed at Gussie, it might conceivably have stirred the old egg up a good deal.
He also sniffed, and when he learned from Madeline that I was keeping newts in my bedroom, he said something very derogatory, under his breath, but I heard him.
You got the troupe with you, then?
Of course. I'm in the middle of a very delicate experiment. An American professor has discovered that the full moon influences the love life of several species of undersea creatures, including one species of fish, 2 starfish groups, 8 kinds of worms, and a ribbon-like seaweed called Dictyota. The moon will be full in 2 or 3 days' time, and I want to see how it affects the love life of newts too.
But what is the love life of newts, if you boil it right down? Didn't you tell me once they just waggle their tails at one another in the mating season?
Quite correct.
I shrugged my shoulders. Well, all right, if they like it, but it's not my idea of molten passion. So, old Bassett didn't approve of the dumb chums? No, he didn't approve of anything about me. It made things most difficult and disagreeable. And suppose you will understand why I'm beginning to get thoroughly rattled. And then out of the blue they sprung it on me that I would have to make a speech at the wedding breakfast to an audience, as I said before, of which Roderick Spode and Sir Watkin Bassett would form a part. He paused and swallowed convulsively, like a Pekingese taking a pill. I'm a shy man, Bertie. Diffidence is the price I pay for having a hypersensitive nature. And you know how I feel about making speeches under any conditions. The mere idea appalls me. When you lugged me into that prize-giving affair at Market Snodsbury, the thought of standing on a platform faced by a mob of pimply boys filled me with the panic terror. It haunted my dreams. You can imagine, then, what it was like for me to have to contemplate that wedding breakfast. To the task of haranguing a flock of aunts and cousins I might have steeled myself. I don't say it would have been easy, but I might have managed it. But to get up with Spode on one side of me and Sir Watkin Bassett on the other, I didn't see how I was going to face it. And then, out of the night that covered me black as a pit from pole to pole, there shone a tiny gleam of hope. I thought of Jeeves. His hand moved upwards, and I think his idea was to bare his head reverently. The project was, however, rendered null and void by the fact that he hadn't a hat on. I thought of Jeeves, he repeated, and I took the train to London and placed my problem before him. I was fortunate to catch him in time. How do you mean, in time? Before he left England. He isn't leaving England? He told me that you and he were starting off almost immediately on one of those round-the-world cruises. Oh, no, that's all off. I didn't like the scheme. Does Jeeves say it's all off? No, but I do. Oh? He looked at me rather oddly, and I thought he was going to say something more on the subject, but he only gave a rummy sort of short laugh and resumed his narrative. Well, as I say, I went to Jeeves and put the facts before him. I begged him to try to find some way of getting me out of this frightful situation in which I was enmeshed, assuring him that I would not blame him if he failed to do so, because it seemed to me, after some days of reviewing the matter, that I was beyond human aid. And you will scarcely credit this, Bertie, I hadn't got more than halfway through the glass of orange juice with which he had supplied me, when he solved the whole thing. I wouldn't have believed it possible. I wonder what his brain weighs. A good bit, I fancy. He eats a lot of fish. So it was a winner, was it, this idea? It was terrific. He approached the matter from the psychological angle. In the final analysis, he said, disinclination to speak in public is due to one's fear of one's audience. Well, I could have told you that. Yes, but he indicated how this might be cured. We do not, he said, fear those whom we despise. The thing to do, therefore, is to cultivate a lofty contempt for those who will be listening to one. How? Quite simple. You fill your mind with scornful thoughts about them. You keep saying to yourself, think of that pimple on Smith's nose, or consider Jones's flapping ears. Remember that time Robinson got hauled up before the beak for travelling first class with a third-class ticket? Don't forget you once saw the child Brown being sick at a children's party, and so on. So that when you are called upon to address Smith, Jones, Robinson and Brown, they've lost their sting. You dominate them. I pondered on this. I see. Well, yes, it sounds good, Gussie, but would it work in practice? My dear chap, it works like a charm. I've tested it. You recall my speech at that dinner of yours? I started. You weren't despising us. Certainly I was, thoroughly. What, me? You, and Freddie Widgeon, and Bingo Little, and Catsmeat Potter, Purbright, and Barmy Fotheringay Phipps, and all the rest of those present. Worms, I said to myself. What a crew, I said to myself. There's old Bertie, I said to myself. Golly, I said to myself, what I know about him. With the result that I played on you as a lot of stringed instruments and achieved an outstanding triumph. I must say I was conscious of a certain chagrin. A bit thick, I mean, being scorned by a goof like Gussie. and that at a moment when he'd been bursting with my meat and orange juice. But soon more generous emotions prevailed. After all, I told myself, the great thing, the fundamental thing to which all other considerations must yield, was to get this Finknottle safely under the wire and off on his honeymoon. And but for this advice of Jeeves, the muttering threats of Roderick Spode and the combined sniffing and looking over the top of pince-nez of Sir Watkin Bassett might well have been sufficient to destroy his morale entirely, and cause him to cancel the wedding arrangements and go off hunting newts in Africa. Well, yes, I said, I see what you mean. But dash it, Gussie, conceding the fact that you might scorn balmy Fotheringay Phipps and Catsmeat Potter Purbright and, stretching the possibilities a bit, me, you couldn't despise Spode. Couldn't I? He laughed a light laugh. I did it on my head. And Sir Watkin Bassett too. I tell you, Bertie, I approach this wedding breakfast without a tremor. I am gay, confident, debonair. There will be none of that blushing and stammering and twiddling the fingers and plucking at the tablecloth, which you see in most bridegrooms on these occasions. I shall look these men in the eye and make them wilt. As for the aunts and cousins, I shall have them rolling in the aisles. The moment Jeeves spoke those words, I settled down to think of all the things about Roderick Spode and Sir Watkin Bassett which exposed them to the just contempt of their fellow men. I could tell you 50 things about Sir Watkin alone, which would make you wonder how such a moral and physical blot on the English scene could have been tolerated all these years. I wrote them down in a notebook. You wrote them down in a notebook? A small, leather-covered notebook. I bought it in the village. I confess that I was a bit agitated. Even though he presumably kept it under lock and key, the mere existence of such a book made one uneasy. One did not care to think what the upshot and outcome would be were it to fall into the wrong hands. A brochure like that would be dynamite. Where do you keep it? In my breast pocket. Here it is. Oh, no, it isn't. That's funny, said Gussie. I must have dropped it somewhere.